Hey, it's Ben Wilmore, and here we're going to take a look at 3 checkboxes in Photoshop. They're labeled red, green, and blue, and they're going to allow us to do a bunch of interesting things with color. Here's an example. If I take a boring subject, boring in that it has no color, it's just a white and black object, and I photograph it using just a portable light source, and I light it from 3 different directions. Then I can take that into Photoshop, and with these 3 little checkboxes, I can suddenly get a bunch of color to show up, but many areas of the image will still look normally colored. But that's not all. If you've ever seen something where people are walking through a scene, we can get the people to suddenly look different. They're going to look colorful and interesting as an interesting element in our photographs. We can also do things more practical, like if you want to only do noise reduction on the green channel or only sharpen the black one. All sorts of things are possible with these checkboxes. So let's dive in and see how they work. So here I just have a simple Photoshop document with 3 layers. I have a black background, white circle, and a picture. Let's start with the white circle. All I'm going to do is, with that layer active, I'll go to the bottom of my layers panel. I'm going to click on the letters FX, and I'm going to choose the top choice, which is called blending options. That's when this comes up, and there we have the checkboxes I want to talk about, red, green, and blue. Let's turn off the green and blue checkboxes so this particular layer can only affect red. That means it'll only be made out of red light. So when I turn those 2 off, you can see that it's just red light. Then I'm going to duplicate this layer by typing Command J. Control J in Windows makes a quick duplicate, and we can move that one over. As you can see, we have 2 red ones now. And let's go back into that exact same choice, and this time let's tell this particular one to not work with red, but to work with green. Click that on, and now you can see that the first circle is only using red light, the second one is only using green. Where they overlap, we have both, and you see a different color in there. Let's duplicate this layer one more time, and I'll move that one down a little bit, and let's go back into those things by going to blending options, and this time let's use just blue. Click OK, and now that layer can only use blue light, and I can now grab these and move them around, and if we have all red, green, and blue being used, that's where the 3 circles overlap, we get the normal color that you would see in whatever was in that layer. And wherever they overlap just partially, we get just cyan, magenta, and yellow. And I can move these around, and these can act just like little spotlights you might see on stage. They commonly do that where they use red, green, and blue, and they just let them partially overlap, and the performer would be right in there. Let's do the same thing with this photograph that's in the upper right. In fact, I'll leave a copy of the original so you can remember what it looks like, and I'm going to make a total of 3 copies. I'll do that by typing Command J 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Then let's turn on a different checkbox for each one of those by going to blending options, and I'll make one of them just red. I'll make the next one down just blue, and you can probably guess what I'll do with the third one, and that's going to, the second one will be just green, and the third one is going to be just, blue. And right now we don't notice anything different, and that's because we always had the original photograph underneath. That original photograph is made of all 3 of those colors, red, green, and blue. So when I tell it to take one of these identical layers above and make it only apply to red, green, or blue, you don't really see anything happen yet. But now watch what happens if I move this top layer. The top layer, I believe, is set to only use red light. Well, now I'm peeling off a copy of the red there. Well, let's go to the next layer down, and I'll move it, and you'll see that it's blue light. And it's the blue light that that image was using to make itself. And let's grab the third one, drag it down, and you can see what we have. Then if we were to stack these back together, we could make the full color picture once again, as long as we can get all 3 of them to line up once again. And what's cool about that, though, is I could make them slightly misalign. Or what I could do is come up here and use something like maybe warping to just pull the corner like this up and do that on one of the layers. I can see a hint of the red coming up that way. I can go to another layer and warp it as well. I'll just choose warp, and I'm going to pull another corner down like this. And then I'm going to go one more layer, and let's warp it. Come up here. In this way, they're not going to precisely align, but near the middle of the frame, they're going to align the most. And let's just move that away from the edge. I'll grab all 3 layers and move it over, and then we can zoom up on it. And if you look at it, sorry, it's low res there, but you can see that the middle of the photograph largely looks normal, but now we're starting to get this interesting distortion and colors on the edge. Well, let's see what we can do with those checkboxes beyond this simple demo. I'm going to go and look for some images that I captured earlier today. Here's one of them. The subject matter has really no color to it. It's a white object on a black base shot on a white background. But look at how I lit it. In this case, the light source was near the upper right. It was falling in this part, and you can see the shadow that was cast that direction. I didn't take just that one shot though. After lighting it from that right side, I switched and I lit it from the left side. And that's why this side of the object is bright and the shadow goes the other direction. Then I took one more shot. This one I shot from above and just the tiniest bit behind so that it doesn't cast a shadow anywhere, and this area down in here didn't get quite as much light. Now let's take those 3 images and let's combine them in Photoshop. I'm just going to tell it to open it in Photoshop. Since these are raw files, it opens Camera Raw. I'll just type Command A, that's Control A in Windows, and hit open. If they were JPEGs, they would have just opened right up. And now I'm just going to combine these images into a single document. There's many ways of doing that. I'm going to use my Move tool here. I'll click within this image, I'll drag to the middle tab, and then I'll drag down within this image, and I'll hold Shift. Shift means keep them in register in the same position. I'll close the one I've already dragged over, and let's go for the third one. I'm going to again click within it with the Move tool, go to the other tab, drag down, and before I let go, I'll hold Shift. That keeps it nice and centered. Let's close that one as well. So now we have all 3 of them here in a single document. Well, each one of these layers right now is using red, green, and blue all together, and it's just the topmost layer is completely covering up this layer, and this layer is completely obscuring your view of this one. Well, let's get it so the topmost layer is the one up here that uses only red light. Let's turn off green and let's turn off blue. Then we can come down to the layer that's underneath. And let's again go over here to blending options. And in this case, we're going to make it only work with green. Click OK. Then I'll come to the bottom one, and I actually don't need to change that because your image as a whole always has red, green, and blue. So if it's currently set where the top layer is causing it to only use red light, and this is only using blue light, then this is where the green is coming from. If you wanted to get to that setting when you're on the background, you have to unlock it by clicking this lock symbol, and you can go in there and do it. I'll just show you that it's not going to matter in this case. I'll turn off those red and green checkboxes. It was already contributing just the blue light. And so we have red here, green there, and blue there. And you can see what we ended up with. And anywhere where all 3 of those light sources overlap, that's where we see the normal color of the object. That's why a lot of the background looks white. That's why the middle of the subject looks white, because with all 3 lights, I hit light right in that area in approximately an even amount. But wherever I use the flashlight over here on the right side, it depends on what color I assigned it, red, green, or blue, but that's what's defining what comes in here, where if it's brightest, whatever I lit from the left side looks like it's got some blue in it. That's what it's using. And then we have the other one from above. And look at how interesting the colors are on the edges of everything. If you want it to look even more interesting, you're welcome to use the Move tool and make them so they're not perfectly in register. Although it'll look a little busier, but we can do that. And then out here on the edge of the image, you might need to crop just because you don't have the full width of the image. But we can create not only this version of it, we can create all sorts of other ones, because here I use red, green, and blue in my layers. What if I switched the order of them? Well, you can do that. All you need to do is go back in there and change the checkboxes. I've created some actions that do that for me. Here it says RGB, but here it says BGR. That means blue, green, red. If I click play, all it's going to do is switch the settings on all those layers. And I have all the 6 different varieties you could create here. And all these actions are doing is switching between each one of the layers and going into that screen where we had the red, green, and blue checkboxes in simply switching what the top layer is. So it's the first letter that's here, the middle layer is what the middle letter is here, and the bottom layer is what the rightmost one is. But you could do that manually if you wanted to. And so I can create all those different varieties. But let's see what else we can do with those same checkboxes. I'm going to head over to Bridge and let's just look at a few examples. Here I've shot on a dock and there are all these workers unloading some sort of ship. And as I shot, they were walking past and past. And to me, I never got a shot that I thought was that interesting. I was trying to make it dark so they would look rather silhouetted. Well, what if I were to take these 3 shots here and layer them one on top of the other, and then use one of them in red, one of them in green, and one of them in blue? Well, these people would be in different positions, and this would be the end result. I think that looks much more interesting. So if you want to see how that can be done, let's do it with another set of images. Here's another. 1, 2, 3. As long as things are moving in the frame, then if we combine them together, we would get this. And here's another. Here's somebody making some incense, and she was moving between shots. When I combine those 3 shots together using red, green, blue, you can see how she was rendered. And here's somebody jumping around, and here's what he ends up looking like in red, green, and blue. Or here we're doing light painting, spinning. Put each one into different color, but wherever the light consistently lit an area within all 3 shots, it looks normal. Here are taxis cruising by. Well, we can take all 3 of those layers, use red, green, and blue, and suddenly we have these interesting blurry vehicles going by in different colors. You can do it in nature as well with waves crashing and suddenly get colors. Or here's my wife Karen doing some yoga. I'm getting a silhouette. Well, why not take all 3 of those shots? I would use auto alignment because I was shooting handheld, and check out what we end up with. So let's do one of those so we can see how we end up with it. I'll do this one here. I'm going to grab these 3 images and open them in Photoshop, and then I'm just going to combine them into a single document. This time, instead of using the Move tool, I'll show you another technique, and that is simply copying and pasting. I'm going to type Command A and then Command C, and then Command W. That means select all, copy, close the window. I'll do that once again after I type Command V for paste. Let's switch to the other tab. And so here's what it was. Command A for select all, Command C for copy, Command W for close the window, Command V for paste. And just replace Command with Control if you're on Windows. Now, since this image was shot handheld, I doubt the bridge is in the same location on every single shot. If I turn off the eyeball here, I can see it moving around a little bit. So I probably want to select all these layers first, then I'm going to come up here to the Edit menu and choose Auto Align Layers. And I'm just going to leave it set to Auto and click OK. That's going to make sure that things line up. So now if I turn off the top eyeball, the bridge should be close to the same location in all the layers. Then let's go in and change those checkboxes. But let me show you another way to get to them. So far we've only gone to the letters FX and chose blending options. But you can do it from up here on your layers panel. All you need to do is double click in the right spot. Not on the picture of the layer, not on the name of the layer, but out here where there's empty space. Just double click and you'll go right in there. So then I can quickly turn those off, and then I can go to the next one, double click beyond the name, and get each one set to a different one of those colors. And there we go. We got all of them. If you don't like the edge of the photograph being multicolored, that's because when we did the auto alignment, it ended up having to move the pictures a little. Then all you need to do is use your crop tool, and I just need to clear out any ratios that are in there. And then I could crop this in to prevent it from snapping to the edge of your document, because you're probably going to be cropping just a few pixels out of there. You can hold down the Control key after you start dragging. Once your mouse button is actually held down, if you hold Control, it does not snap to the edge of things. And there, I could crop the image nicely. Then that's not the only result I could end up with. Maybe I don't like that this area here is magenta. I would prefer it to be one of these other colors. Well, all you need to do is return to the same area, and instead of using red for the topmost channel, let's reverse them. Let's use blue instead. And then the middle one I might leave the same, and let's go to the bottom one and swap it out, make it red. And as long as we use red, green, and blue, all three of them, and some part of the scene is consistent, the same colors in all three, some part of your photograph will look normal, and only where it's different between the three photographs is where you're going to get the color, and it can create some really interesting looks in your photograph. There's actually 6 different combinations that you can use, and I've created some actions here that I use personally, but I'm going to say let's look at them all in a grid. I'll just hit play here in my action, and it's going to duplicate the document and show me all of those varieties. This is what it looks like if you have the first, second, and third channel set to these particular colors. You can see that you can get a variety of end results. If you don't want your photos looking funky like these, let's do something with text, because text can sometimes be boring. So let's just come in here and type some text. And I'll make sure that we have black text, and I'll make it big enough so that it fills a good portion of my screen. Well, with that, I could again make 3 copies. Well, 2 copies, so I have a total of 3 of these. I do that by typing Command-J, Control-J in Windows, which is just a shortcut for coming up here to this command. You're welcome to do it manually if you hate keyboard shortcuts. Then let's change what color each one of these can affect. I'm going to double-click to the right of the name of the layer. I'm going to make that one red. And I'm going to take the next one down by double-clicking to the right of the name, green. And I'll make the third one blue, and we don't notice anything happening because they perfectly align, and so we see everything just fine. But watch what happens now if I use my move tool and I reposition these. And I could just use the arrow keys if I'm in my move tool and move these around a bit. Now we can get that kind of misregistered text look. Or you can come up here and again transform it and do some sort of warping so it doesn't look consistent. In this case, it looks like we're set to arcing, so let's click on the word blend and drag a little. And it could be that we do that for one layer, and we go to a different layer, and we try it again, edit, transform, and warp. And if it's set to arcing, why don't we go the opposite direction, do a negative to go that time. And now you can see how we can get the misregistered text. It's only where all 3 pieces of those text overlaps that we actually see black. And sometimes I do this and I don't want to see black in the middle. I just want a vivid color there. So there is a trick you can do there I'll share with you. I'm going to get a selection of only the areas that look black in here. I'm going to do it by working over here in my layers panel. What I'll do is hold down the Command key if I'm on a Mac, that's Control if you're on Windows, and I'm going to move my mouse onto the top letter T that's right here. And when I have that Command key held down and I click, I get a selection of whatever the content of that layer is. Then I'll move down to the next one, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to be Command clicking, but before I do, I'm going to say only give me where this text overlaps the text that's already selected. To do that, I need to add 2 additional keys, Shift and Option. That's Shift and Alt if I'm in Windows. That means I have a total of 3 keys held down, Shift, Option, Command on a Mac, Shift, Alt, Control in Windows. I click on the middle letter T, I come down to the bottom one and do the exact same thing. Now I have just the black part of the text selected. I can then click on the topmost layer because anything I add I need to put on top so it covers up what's underneath, and I'm going to come down here to the adjustment layer icon and choose solid color because now I can choose whatever color I want to put where we used to have the black text, and I'm going to put red. So now you can get some crazy looking, very colorful text quickly. Let's switch to this other image and let's see what else we can do with the checkboxes. They don't just work in RGB mode. They're only called red, green, and blue because you're in RGB mode. You can change the mode of your image to CMYK mode. That's the mode you usually need to use if you're going to end up printing on a printing press. And in this case, we have some black text. Well, if I come over here and open the info panel, right over here where it says CMYK, if I hover my mouse over various areas, it will tell me how much ink is going to be used in each area. And if I move this on top of the text, notice that text is not just made out of black. Instead, it's made out of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Well, you could get it to only print with black ink. How? Double click to the right of the name and you'll get to those checkboxes. And here for CMYK, we have one for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. We could just turn off the checkboxes for cyan, magenta, and yellow, and therefore it'll only print with black. But be careful with that. A lot of people seem to do that, but you have to pay attention to what's going on in the info panel. In the info panel now, look at the numbers. There's only 90% black that's in there. And so therefore that's going to have dots in it to have it reproduce that way. So it's not the most ideal. Another thing that a lot of people use this for is when you're in CMYK mode, if you were to select the subject of your photograph, like here, this truck, you could copy it to its own layer by typing Command J to get it on its own layer. Then down here underneath, you would have the shadow, and if I hide it, you see the truck is sitting on the layer above. Well, here, if we have that shadow, and I move my mouse into the shadow, look at what it's made out of in the info panel. There's very little black ink in it. There's mainly cyan, magenta, and yellow. And the problem with that is oftentimes one of those inks can print a little bit heavy, and when it does, it's going to shift the color of that shadow. So it's going to suddenly look a little warm or cool instead of looking neutral like it should. Well, again, this is the same problem as with the text. If we were to go in to those little checkboxes for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and we were to turn on so all we have is using black ink, then you're going to find that shadow is so light because it has nowhere near as much ink, and you're going to find the shape of the shadow will change. Watch the back of the shadow. I'll turn the other checkboxes back on, and you'll see the shadow had a different shape and extended out further. So to show you that that's not always the best choice to use, those checkboxes, I'll show you the alternative for this particular case. If you get the shadow onto its own layer, like I have, choose Image, Adjustments, and what you want is the channel mixer. The channel mixer is just like those little checkboxes. It works on cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. What we want to do here is set this menu to cyan and set this to 0. That means use no cyan ink whatsoever. That is the same as turning off the checkbox next to the word cyan that we were playing with earlier. Let's go to magenta and do the same thing. Type in 0. And let's go to yellow and type in 0. Then let's go to black. But here's the difference. When we were working with only the checkboxes, there was no control in there to allow me to darken the shadow. What I now am going to do is say, let's take what used to be printed with cyan ink and let's instead print it with black by bringing this up a little bit. Let's do the same for magenta and let's do the same for yellow. And that's a much better way because now the shape of the shadow is consistent. And if I were to click OK and put my mouse on that shadow, look in the info panel and notice it is printing with only black ink. When it comes to the text, I also would not use these checkboxes, even though I find a lot of people doing so. Instead, I would click on my foreground color. I would choose black. And here you see the mix that would be used to make the text. Just type in for the cyan, magenta, yellow 0 and type in 100 for black. That's the color you want your text to be. If you already have text on your screen and you want to change the color of it, and that's the layer that's active, you can type Option Delete or Alt Backspace in Windows, and that's going to fill your text with your foreground color. And so right now I need to go in here and it tells me 100% here. If it tells me a lower percentage anywhere else, it's probably because my eyedropper tool is set to an average of an area. Let's switch to one more image and do a creative effect. In this case, I'm going to duplicate the layers. So we have 3 of them because we need one for red, one for green, and one for blue. And I'll get each one set the way I would like. And then what we're going to do is limit where each layer appears. In this one, I'll actually change the bottom layer as well. Usually it's not necessary, but in this case it will be. So this is set to red, that's green, and that's blue. Now let's limit where each layer appears. We can do that by coming over here to the Shape tool. I'm going to use the one that creates a rectangle, and up here in my options bar, I'm going to tell it to make a path. And therefore, when I draw with it, I'm just going to get an outline that doesn't yet do anything. But then if I go up to the layer menu, I can choose Vector Mask, use my current path. And that means let's limit where the active layer shows up so it only shows up inside that path. So I'll choose that, and now the areas out here are not getting all three of the colors, red, green, and blue. Right now they're only getting two of them, green and blue. But let's do the same thing with the others. Let's click on the next layer down and let's make yet another one of these. And let's take that middle layer and say layer, vector mask, current path. So now it's limiting that one as well. We'll go to the final one of these layers, and once again I'm going to draw one of these boxes, and then I'm going to once again go to the layer menu, vector mask, current path, and now only where all three of those overlap do we get the normal full color photograph, and out here beyond the edge is where we get red, green, or blue, or we'll get cyan, magenta, and yellow where those pieces overlap. To finish that off, I come down here and add a solid color layer, and this is something I would want to put underneath. And I can either put white underneath there and just drag it to the bottom of my layers panel, and then I'm going to see cyan, magenta, and yellow in those areas. Or if I double click on the left side of this layer, I can change the color, and I'm going to set it to black. And if so, then you'll instead see red, green, and blue in those areas. Then you can always go to these particular masks that are here. Click right on the mask, and if you're still in that shape tool, you're going to be able to come over here and resize this, and you should be able to, if you move close to the corner, you should be able to rotate them as well. Then just click on the next layer, click on its mask, and you should be able to scale it as well. And you're scaling the mask, not the picture. Therefore, you can create some rather interesting looks. Just press return or enter when you're done, and you can fine tune this whole thing. If you like the look of the red, green, and blue that you get with a black background, but you don't want the black background, you prefer white, then we need to get a mask. So what I'm going to do here is in my layers panel, I'm going to get a selection of whatever these three shapes are put together. To do so, I'll hold down the command key, I'll click within one mask, then I'll add the shift key to say I want to add this one as well. And so I'm holding command and shift, I click on the middle one, and then I go to the bottom one and do the same thing. Then I can go to the layer that's underneath. It has a layer mask attached to it, and right now I want to select inverse to get the opposite of that, because I only want to hide the area that is outside of the selection. By choosing inverse, now I can fill that area with black. Currently my background color is black, and I can fill with my background color by doing command delete. That would be control backspace in Windows. And so now I have that red, green, and blue that you only get when you have a black background, but I could throw another one of those solid color layers in there with white and just put it in the bottom. And then I still get the look that I would only get if I had a black area behind this, and I still have white surrounding it. So you do have some versatility there. But my favorite use for this technique is to take an otherwise boring looking object and to light it in three different directions using white light, and then in Photoshop get any one of these 6 different varieties. The only difference between the 6 different images at the bottom are what order of red, green, and blue were used in those layers. Was the top one set to red or was it set to green? That type of thing. If you want to know more about Photoshop, here